Her elder sister laughed so loudly that the sound filled the entire conference room. Eh, an old warehouse, she said, pressing her hand against her chest. Father left you an old warehouse. The second sister covered her mouth but could not hide the smile underneath it. Around the room, the lawyers, the company directors, the family associates, every person who had gathered for the reading of the will sat in uncomfortable silence. Some looked at the floor, some looked at their hands. Nobody looked at Adaeze, because Adaeze was the one sitting in the corner of the room holding herself very still. She had not cried. She had not argued. She had not stood up and reminded everyone in that room that she was the one who had driven her father to his chemotherapy appointments every single week for 2 years. She had not mentioned the night she had slept in the hospital chair beside his bed. She had not brought up the morning she had held his hand when the doctors told him the treatment was no longer working. And she had held herself together in that moment so completely that the doctor had later pulled her aside and said he had never seen a family member receive that kind of news with that kind of courage. She said none of it. She simply sat in the corner of that conference room with her hands folded in her lap and listened to her sister laugh. And the warehouse on the edge of the city, the crumbling building with the broken roof and the overgrown compound that nobody had entered in years, became the only thing her father had left her, or so everyone believed. Before we continue, dear friends, if you are new to this channel, welcome home. This is the place for stories like Adaeze's, stories about love that goes unseen and patience that gets mistaken for weakness, and the specific kind of justice that arrives not loudly but completely. Please take just one moment to like this video, drop a comment below telling me where you are watching from, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. I read every single comment, everyone. Now let us go back to the beginning, before the warehouse, before the will, before everything that would eventually bring her sisters to their knees. Let us begin with the family. Chief Donatus Okafor had built his fortune the old way, not through inheritance or luck or the kind of connection that arrives through birth. He had built it through 30 years of working before everyone else woke up and stopping after everyone else had gone to sleep. He started with a small trading company in Onitsha when he was 26 years old. He borrowed the startup capital from his uncle and repaid it within 18 months with interest the uncle had not asked for. That early decision to repay more than was owed when he could have repaid less and been within his rights told you everything about the kind of man Chief Donatus was. By the time his 3 daughters were born, he had expanded into real estate, construction materials, and a logistics company that moved goods across 6 states. His name was known in boardrooms and markets alike. His word was his bond in the specific old-fashioned way that made even people who did not like him trust him. His 3 daughters were Chisom, Nneka, and Adaeze. Chisom arrived first and absorbed the world's admiration the way certain people do, as though it were simply her due. She dressed as though every room she entered was waiting specifically for her. She spoke as though her opinions were the conclusion of every argument. She loved her father the way people love things that reflect well on them, loudly when it was convenient and not at all when it was not. Nneka followed Chisom in everything, not because she lacked personality, but because following Chisom had been the path of least resistance since childhood, and she had never found a reason to stop. She copied Chisom's mannerisms, her social circle, her relationship with money, which was to say she spent it freely and worried about it never. When Chisom laughed at something, Nneka laughed a moment later. When Chisom formed an opinion, Nneka adopted it. They moved through the world as a unit, and the unit was not kind. Adaeze was last. She was quiet in the way that people are quiet when they are genuinely interested in the world around them and have noticed that listening produces more information than speaking. She had her father's eyes and her father's habit of arriving early and staying late and never drawing attention to either. From the time she was a teenager, she preferred sitting with her father in his study while he reviewed company documents to attending the social event her sister spent weeks preparing for, not because she was told to, but because she found it genuinely interesting. Her father noticed. He would look up from his documents sometimes and find her reading one of his business books, and he would say, "What have you learned from that one, Adaeze?" And she would tell him, not a summary, a genuine engagement with the ideas, a question she had formed while reading, a connection she had made between something in the book and something she had observed in the world. He would put down his pen and listen. These were, though neither of them named it at the time, the most important conversations of his life.
Chisom and Nneka's relationship with their father was different. It was not that they did not love him, they did, in their way, but their love was the love of people who have confused the source with the supply. They loved what their father provided. When they visited his office, they were asking for something. When they called him, there was usually an underlying reason. When they sat with him at family dinners, the conversation moved quickly towards money, towards assets, towards what he planned to give them and when. Chief Donatus understood this. He was not naive, he was simply patient. He would give them what they asked for and say nothing about the pattern. He would watch Chisom drive away in the car he had bought her and think about what she would do when no one was buying the cars anymore. He would watch Nneka at the social event she hosted with his money and think about what would anchor her when the money ran out. He thought about these things alone because there was no one to think about them with, except Adaeze. One evening, when she was in her mid-20s and he was beginning to show the first signs of the illness that would eventually take him, he called Adaeze into his room one evening, 6 weeks before he died. She could tell from his expression that this was a different kind of conversation, not the kind where he was teaching her something, the kind where he was preparing her for something. He said, "Adaeze, sit down." She sat. He said, "I want to tell you something about the warehouse on Ejega Road." She frowned slightly. She knew the building. It was an old property at the edge of the industrial area, a large structure that had been abandoned for years. Her father had owned it for as long as she could remember but had never developed it. He said, "What about it, father?" He said, "When I am gone, go there, go inside, look carefully." She said, "Father," he said, "do not argue with me about this. Simply do what I'm telling you." She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "I will." He said, "I know you will." He paused. "That is why I'm telling you, and not your sisters." She did not ask what he meant. She understood that asking would produce an answer she was not ready to receive in that moment. She simply held his hand. He closed his eyes. She stayed until he slept. He died on a Tuesday morning in November. Not dramatically, not surrounded by crisis. He simply drifted from sleep into the place beyond it while Adaeze held his hand, and the nurse monitored the machine, and the Lagos morning went about its business outside the hospital window. Adaeze sat with him for a long time after. She was still sitting there when Chisom and Nneka arrived 20 minutes later, out of breath from rushing. The grief in the room was different from each of them. Chisom's grief was real, but noisy. She cried with the full force of someone who has just understood that a chapter has permanently closed. Nneka held Chisom and cried too. They comforted each other the way sisters do. Adaeze sat quietly, with her hand still resting near her father's. Nobody noticed her tears because she did not let them fall in a way that demanded attention. The will was read 2 weeks after the burial. The lawyer's name was Mr. Chukwemeka. He was a serious man who had worked with Chief Donatus for over 15 years and who carried the specific expression of someone who knows things about the people in the room that those people do not yet know about themselves. He read the will steadily and without drama. To Chisom, the primary family mansion in Maitama, Abuja, along with the accompanying vehicles, jewelry, and personal assets contained within it. Chisom sat forward. To Nneka, the second family property in Lekki, Lagos, fully furnished along with the investment portfolio attached to it. Nneka exhaled quietly. Both sisters were composed, but the satisfaction was visible in the way it is always visible, in the slight relaxation of posture, in the corner of a smile that has not been invited yet but is on its way. Mr. Chukwemeka continued. To Adaeze, the warehouse on Ejega Road, Onitsha, including the structure and the land on which it stands. The room went still. Then Chisom laughed. It was the laugh that would live in Adaeze's memory for a long time, not because it hurt more than anything else, but because it was so complete, so unbothered, so certain of itself. An old warehouse, she said. Father left you an old warehouse. Nneka shook her head slowly. After everything. Several people in the room exchanged glances. Some looked uncomfortable. One of the company directors, who had known Chief Donatus for 20 years, looked at Adaeze with an expression she could not immediately read. Later, she would understand that his expression had not been pity. It had been anticipation.
Adaeze drove to Onitsha the following morning. She did not tell her sister she was going. There was nothing to tell them. The warehouse was on a quiet industrial road, set back from the main streets behind a rusted gate that groaned when she pushed it open. The building was large, larger than she remembered from the few times she had passed it as a child. The walls were grey concrete, old but structurally sound. Several windows on the upper level had broken panes. The compound was overgrown with elephant grass. She stood in the compound and looked at it. she said quietly to herself, "Father, what did you see here that I am not yet seeing?" She walked to the main entrance. The door was padlocked. She tried the keys Mr. Chukwuemeka had handed her with the deed. The third key worked. The door swung open. Inside, the air was cool and still. The space was enormous, the full interior of a large industrial building. High ceilings, concrete floors, the skeleton of old storage shelving along the walls. Light came through the upper windows in long diagonal columns. She walked slowly through the space. At the far end of the main floor, she found a small office partitioned off from the main space. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open. Inside was a desk. On the desk was an envelope. Her name was written on the front in her father's handwriting. She sat down on the old office chair, held the envelope for a long time, and then opened it. The letter was 3 pages. She read it slowly, the way you read something you want to keep. "My dearest Adaeze, if you are reading this, then you came, as I knew you would. Your sisters would not have come, not because they are bad people, but because they would not have known there was a reason to come. You came because you trusted me. You have always trusted me. That trust is the greatest gift any child has ever given a parent. I need to tell you something about this building. For the last 11 years, while everyone believed I had forgotten about this property, I have been quietly doing something here. I will not explain it in this letter. Instead, I need you to go to the floor below. The access door is behind the shelving unit on the eastern wall. Press the third panel from the left. You will find a staircase. Go down the stairs. Then you will understand everything." Adaeze put the letter down. She stood up. She walked back into the main warehouse space and moved to the eastern wall where the old shelving unit stood. She counted the panels. Third from the left. She pressed it. A soft mechanical sound, then a click. A section of the shelving unit swung outward on a concealed hinge. Behind it was a staircase leading downward. Adaeze stood at the top of those stairs for a long moment. Then she descended. At the bottom of the stairs was a door, heavy, fireproof, with an electronic lock. Beside it was a small keypad. At the bottom of the letter, she had noticed a sequence of numbers she had not understood at the time. She typed them in. The lock released. The door swung open, and Adaeze stopped breathing. The space behind the door was not a basement in any ordinary sense. It was a fully operational facility. Rows of server equipment lined one wall. Detailed architectural drawings covered several long tables. One section held what appeared to be models of large-scale construction projects. Another held files, organized meticulously, labeled by project name and year. She walked slowly through the space, reading labels, opening folders. Project Onitsha Hub, Project Eastern Logistics Corridor, Project Orca Commercial Complex. She pulled open the largest file. Inside were property titles, construction permits, investor agreements, and financial statements. She sat down at the central table and read for 3 hours without stopping. What she was reading was this. For 11 years, Chief Donatus Okafor had been quietly developing a second empire, not under his own name, under a holding company whose name she recognized from the documents as one he had registered years ago. He had purchased land across the southeast. He had developed logistics hubs, commercial complexes, and residential estates. He had structured the ownership through a series of legal instruments that were clean, documented, and airtight. The total value of the portfolio, as stated in the most recent financial summary, dated 3 months before his death, was 2.4 billion naira. Adaeze sat in that underground room with those documents spread around her, and she pressed her hands flat on the table and she breathed very slowly. She looked up at the ceiling. She said, "Father, "What did you see here that I am not yet seeing?" And for the first time since he had died, she did not cry from grief. She cried from the full understanding of what he had trusted her with. Mr. Chukwuemeka arrived the next afternoon. He knocked on the warehouse door, and when she opened it, he looked at her face and nodded slightly, the way someone nods when they see confirmation of what they already expected. She let him in. He said, "You found the lower level?" She said, "I did." He sat down across from her in the small office. He said, "Your father gave me these instructions over a period of 5 years. He was very specific about everything, the timing, the sequence, the reason." She said, "Why did he do it this way?" Mr. Chukwuemeka looked at her steadily. He said, "Because he understood that wealth given without wisdom is simply a problem transferred to the next generation. He knew what your sisters would do with what they received. He did not say this with bitterness. He simply knew. And he wanted what he left you to go to someone who had already demonstrated that they understood the difference between owning something and building something." Adaeze was quiet. He continued. He said, "The portfolio is yours outright. The company structures are clean and the management teams are already in place and have been waiting. There is a board that your father assembled over the past 3 years, professional people who know the vision and are committed to it. They know about you. They have been expecting you." She said, "They know about me?" He said, "Your father talked about you at every board meeting." She pressed her lips together. He opened his briefcase and placed several files on the desk. He said, "There is one more thing. Your father's original company, the one your sisters believe belongs to them through the mansion and the portfolio inheritance, the one whose leadership they have been attempting to assume, that company has a board charter. A clause in the charter that your father inserted 8 years ago without announcement. It states that executive authority over operational decisions rests with the appointed successor, not with inheritance recipients." Adaeze looked at him. He said, "He appointed you 3 years ago. The documentation is in the file." Chisom and Nneka settled into their inherited properties with the specific enthusiasm of people who believe they have won something. The Maitama mansion became the site of parties that the neighbors discussed with raised eyebrows. The Lekki property was renovated at significant expense, with money drawn from the investment portfolio Nneka was left with, money that was not designed to be spent on renovations, but was spent on them anyway because nobody had taught Nneka how to read an investment statement. Within 4 months, the portfolio was down by 30%. Chisom attempted to access the operational accounts of their father's company and was politely informed by the company secretary that executive authority had been a matter of board resolution and that the board would be pleased to schedule a meeting at which the matter could be clarified. The meeting happened on a Wednesday morning. Adaeze arrived first. She had been working for 2 months by that point, spending her days in the underground facility in Onitsha, learning the portfolio she had inherited, meeting the management teams her father had assembled, understanding the projects that were in various stages of development. She had not announced herself publicly. She had simply worked. When she walked into the company boardroom that Wednesday morning, the executives who recognized her from her father's stories stood to greet her with the warmth of people meeting someone they have heard about for years. Chisom and Nneka arrived 7 minutes later. They stopped in the doorway. Chisom said, "What are you doing here?" Adaeze looked at her sister. She said, "I was appointed. I am the successor." The room was quiet. Mr. Chukwuemeka, seated at the end of the table, opened the file in front of him. He read the board charter clause, he read the succession document, he read the financial summary of the secondary portfolio. With every page he turned, the color in Chisom's face changed. Nneka sat down slowly, as though her legs had made a decision before the rest of her. When it was finished, the room was completely silent.
Chisom looked at Adaeze. She said, "He planned all of this." Adaeze said yes. Chisom was quiet for a long time. Then something in her face shifted.
The performance of confidence fell away, and what remained underneath it was something she had not shown in years. She said quietly, "We laughed at you." Adaeze looked at her sister and felt something complicated. Not triumph, not vindication, something sadder and more honest. She said, "I know." Chisom said, "We were cruel." Adaeze said, "Yes, you were." The room was very still. Adaeze took a breath. She said, "Father did not plan this to punish you. He was not that kind of man. He planned it because he understood that the best thing he could give each of his daughters was the thing she had already shown she was ready for." She paused. "You two were ready for comfort. I was ready for responsibility." Chisom looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly, for the first time in years, she did something that surprised everyone in the room. She bowed her head. What followed was not a fairy tale restoration. Real life does not arrange itself into clean resolutions. Chisom and Nneka had to reckon with the consequences of how they had managed what they received. The Maitama mansion required significant expense repairs that their remaining funds struggled to cover. Nneka's reduced portfolio needed careful management to recover. Both sisters faced the specific education that only consequence can deliver. But Adaeze did not leave them to face it alone. She hired a financial advisor for Chisom and paid for the first year of fees herself. She helped Nneka restructure the portfolio management. She did not do this to appear generous or to create obligation. She did it because she was her father's daughter, and because her father had taught her that goodness is never wasted. She ran the company steadily. The projects in the secondary portfolio moved forward. The logistics hubs opened. The commercial complexes were completed. The residential estates attracted buyers. The 2.4 billion naira portfolio grew. She hired from the communities surrounding the developments. She established a training program for young people in the Southeast who wanted to work in business and construction. She launched it in her father's name. When journalists wrote about her, they always mentioned that she had received a warehouse when her sisters received mansions. She never corrected the framing, because the framing was accurate as far as it went. She had received a warehouse. What the warehouse contained was simply something the journalists could not have known until she told them. And when she told them, she always said the same thing. She said, "My father understood something that most people miss. The greatest inheritance is not what is given. It is what the recipient is prepared to do with it. He did not give me wealth. He gave me work, and the work was its own wealth." Dear friends, if you have stayed until the very end, I want to say something directly to you. The warehouse in this story is not just a building. It is every situation you have been handed that looked like a burden and turned out to be a beginning. It is every moment where someone laughed at what you received while not understanding what was inside it. It is every season where you were patient and showed up and did the quiet work while everyone else was at the party, and you wondered whether any of it was being noticed. It was being noticed. Maybe not by the people in the room, but by the one who matters most. Adaeze's story teaches us that the person who asks questions about the tree, not just about the fruit, is the person who will still be building long after the fruit has been eaten and forgotten. Ask about the tree. Show up for the people that matter. Do the quiet work, and trust that goodness, as her father said, is never wasted. Drop a comment below. Tell me which part of this story stayed with you. Tell me if you recognize someone in your own life, in Adaeze, in her father, in her sisters. Tell me where in this beautiful world you are watching from tonight. I read every comment, every single one. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that what they have been handed is not the end of the story, it is the beginning of it. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss a story on this channel. And before you go, click the video on your screen right now. Another powerful story is waiting for you. Until next time, dear friends, ask about the tree. Good night.